Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Locked On Bucks host Camille Davis to discuss whether the Knicks have finally reversed the trend. Do they have the Bucks number now? We'll get into that and so much more next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? You are Locked On Knicks. I wanted to remind you that now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We are now on YouTube, have been for a couple of years now, so be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell to ensure you never, ever miss an episode. If you can, comment, leave a 5-star review. All stuff that helps the show grow, and I really appreciate it. So who's talking to him? Gavin Schall, recently relocated cross-country, but still a New Yorker at heart, been covering the NBA for about a decade, and really excited to get into this one. My first time ever talking to Camille. Super fun guest, and I am fascinated by this Knicks-Bucks rivalry. 9 straight wins against the New York Knicks. They had our number for such a long time. Has that flipped? Final note before we get started. This is my third and I think last episode without my microphone. Left my USB cord for it in New York. Should be getting out here. I'm going to be on vacation for a week or two, but when I come back, hopefully the audio is all good today, but should be much better in the future. So without further ado, let's talk to Camille right now. All right, guys, as promised, lucky enough to be joined by Camille Davis, the co-host of the Locked On Bucks podcast. Camille, is the first time we've had the pleasure of doing a podcast together. I wanted to belatedly welcome you into the Locked On Podcast Network. Excited to get to talk to you today.
Appreciate it. It's been fun doing Locked On Bucks, getting to know everybody else on the Locked On Podcast Network. So I always love getting a chance to do the crossover episodes and picking someone else's brain and hearing a bit more about other teams, especially when they're the ops like the Knicks are. So this should be fun.
Yeah, it is a proud rivalry. We were talking pre-show. I was lamenting the fact that your Packers have such a bright future in the NFL. We were mutually making fun of my Giants. I don't even want to go there right now. I'm assuming no one in New York listening, except for Jets fans and maybe Bills fans, want to go there right now. But we could say the same historically about, or at least in terms of recent history, about the Bucks and the Knicks. So the Bucks have largely kicked the Knicks' butts, and that's not even the word I want to use there. I think it was 9 wins in a row from Milwaukee over the Knicks before the Knicks got 2 of the last 3 to finish up last season. And that was exciting because against Milwaukee, it was always like watching a horror movie, and you could survive, but at the end, like Jason was going to come out of nowhere and decapitate you. And for the Bucks, Jason was Giannis Antetokounmpo, and at some point the Knicks just weren't going to be able to stop him. Chris Middleton was going to make some crazy mid-range shots. Brook Lopez was going to hit a wide-open 3 because we were crashing so hard to stop Giannis. And inevitably, as good as the Knicks have been the last 4 years, things would fall apart and Milwaukee would get the better of them. So I want to start off there. Why do you think over the years the Knicks have been such prey to Milwaukee, I guess is the best way to phrase it? And then what do you think flipped late last season where the Knicks started competing a little bit better with the Bucks?
It's a really interesting question because I never even framed it that way of like, oh yeah, the Knicks are food for the Bucks. It's just, I always think about it of like, okay, the Bucks have big moments when they play against the Knicks, which is interesting. I never really put those pieces together because I think even of like the Giannis dunk over Tim Hardaway Jr., which was my screensaver on my phone for quite some time. Can't lie about that one. The Giannis's game winner when Melo was still in New York as well was like the emergence of Giannis as a real star in the NBA at that time. But yeah, there have been some battles. And I think last year, that Christmas Day game, going into it where I was just like, okay, we beat the Knicks quite a few times in a row here. If they can do it again on Christmas, I mean, opening presents will feel even better. But it didn't go that way this past year. And I think part of it is just that, this Bucks team as it's currently constructed with Damian Lillard as the point guard now, it's a bit different. We got used to being a real big defensive first team, and then this past season was a transition for this team trying to figure out its new identity and how it's going to get its footing together. And I think you guys having Jalen Brunson turn into the star that he is, he's the type of player that can cause the Bucks trouble, especially in that drop coverage, because in the drop, it's like, hey, take all the mid-range shots you want. We're going to make it difficult for you. And Jalen Brunson loves those shots. He's really adapted those middies, the floaters, all of the in-between game that can give a drop coverage some problems. And on top of that, when you pair that into the fact that the Bucks didn't really have a top-tier point of attack defender to even make those shots a bit more difficult for Jalen Brunson, like it got dark pretty quick for what the Bucks were able to do. But it's a really good competition between these two teams.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think the Knicks personnel wise, just like I think the biggest thing is they physically have a chance against Milwaukee now. Like there were just and it's weird because the Knicks at times were like early on in I say this Jalen Brunson era, it's been 2 years, but that first season Brunson at times they were the bullies. Like you look at that series against the Cavs where they just ate every single offensive rebound and had Jared Allen saying the lights were too bright. But then when they play like legitimately the best of the East at times against the Celtics, certainly against the Bucks, certainly against the Heat, it would just feel like, all right, there are levels to this, and the Knicks are not quite there yet. And then going out and getting OG Anunoby and replacing guys like RJ Barrett, who's physical in his own right, and Emmanuel Quickley, who's just a smaller, skinnier guy, despite being a supremely talented player. The Knicks like actually have a chance against Giannis. We're saying, all right, we can throw OG at him. We can throw Julius Randle at him. We can throw Mitchell Robinson at him. And those guys aren't shutting Giannis down. On the wrong night, they might not even be slowing him down. But at least like there is a chance versus just having someone like RJ where Giannis can say, all right, I'm going right through that guy. But what do you think about the Knicks overall heading into next season? And in particular, like where do they rank on the scale of like, all right, these are the teams to fear in the East? I think as much as I want the compliment, it'd be crazy to say anyone other than Boston is in pole position there. But with the Sixers looming, with other teams coming up, are the Knicks sort of the next scariest team for you? Or what do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, so when I think about the Eastern Conference tiers, I think Boston is pole position for sure, defending champs, and they earned that last year with the way they ran through the league at ease, it seemed like, for multiple stretches throughout the year. So Boston, number one for sure, defending champs, all the respect to them. And then I think you have that like contending tier of the other teams in the East that are real strong contenders to take the East if things don't go well in Boston. And I think you put in that group, you put Philly, you put Milwaukee, and I think the Knicks are honestly in that group as well. Teams like Cleveland, Indy, I would put them in like a tier below that particular one, but that one right with the Celtics, like we're really threatening. I think it's New York, Philly, and Milwaukee in that particular tier. And I still have some questions about the Knicks. Like I love how you guys went all in on the wing defenders and getting that up. We saw it work in Boston. So like the league is kind of a copycat league. So I like that. And I love the pieces you have together. I do have some questions around the center position because I do think a lot of people aren't really fully realizing the loss of Hartenstein and what that's going to do defensively for the Knicks. But I think the Knicks have a lot in the tank to offer this season. They should be a real contender. What about you?
No, I'm in total agreement, and I think I'm in kind of a wig. We're going to get deeper into this in the next two segments, but I'm in a very weird place with the Bucks because part of me is saying, all right, just let's look at this logically, right? Brooke Lopez 35, 36 heading into this year. Dame is 33. Chris Middleton has not had a healthy season since that championship run, and even that season had injuries at different points. It just like. I think everyone is assuming it is going to be better this year for Milwaukee. And I am someone who loves Giannis, who respects what the Bucks have done. If it wasn't for the fact that I'm also a Suns fan, would have celebrated that Bucks title for sure. And yet, like, I don't know why the expectation is things are suddenly going to be better for all those guys as they get older. Like you typically do not become less injury prone. You typically do not become more explosive as you enter your mid-30s. And yet there are extenuating circumstances. I think a lot of it weighs on Damian Lillard and his ability with last year being such a weird offseason for him, not knowing where he was going to play. I think you would obviously know better than me, but I think he said like he wasn't even trying to overtrain because he was told like, all right, like if you get injured, like sorry, trade's out the window. So don't get injured. Was going through a divorce. Like there was a lot there. Milwaukee has undoubtedly, I thought they had a brilliant offseason given the fact that they had maybe the most finite resources available in the league this side of Phoenix. And somehow getting Gary Trent Jr. to go there on a minimum, getting Taurean Prince, getting DeLon Wright. Like there are legitimate reinforcements. And maybe the best argument you could make is like there's just going to be less of a weight on those other guys' shoulders. But I think I still have my doubts that the peak version of Milwaukee from 2021 is in there. And yet the ceiling of what Dame and Giannis as a duo can look like is still scary. Like we very rarely do this on Locked On Knicks. After that trade went down, like without a guest, we just did a whole episode on another team because we're like, all right, it's kind of over. Like, forget what the Celtics did. Like, you have the greatest 30-plus foot three-point shooter in NBA history, and then maybe like one of the three greatest downhill threats in NBA history in Giannis playing together, pick and roll every time. No one's stopping that. And for whatever reason, and we could talk about it in just a sec, Camille, it just never really came together for the Bucks the way they kind of expected that combo to.
I am so excited for the next segment already because I have been saying to anyone I can talk to, I feel like I might be too optimistic about the Bucks. And I've been saying I need someone to talk me down because I feel like I'm going over the edge because I see so many different avenues for potential for this team to improve on what they did last year and a lot of reasons to be optimistic about what the Bucks are able to do this upcoming season. So I can't wait to talk a little bit more about that and get your opinion on why I see it the way I do. Because if you can talk me down a little bit, you might be able to save me some future heartbreak from what I'm projecting that this Bucks team can do.
All right. We'll have a little Bucks optimism therapy next on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Bucks. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at BetterHelp and remind you that this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's something you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you like? Or was that lost in childhood? Camille, I've been wanting to learn how to play guitar since I was like 5 years old. I've just never made the time for it. I think this is it for me. I see kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, you sometimes lose that curiosity. I don't want that to be me. I want to always be trying new things. And the beauty of therapy is it can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back to school era can come at any age. And there's this great realization that like, hey, your life isn't over at 30 or 40 or 50. There's always room to grow. Therapy can help you get there. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, we are back. It is a Locked On Bucks, Locked On Knicks crossover. Camille, you were telling me you have a lot of Bucks optimism. Yes. I have some latent Bucks pessimism, while also there's a nagging feeling in the back of my head that's saying, do not dismiss this team. When even last year, with all the chaos, with all the crap, when their big four were on the court together, Milwaukee played and often looked like a championship contender. And despite all the tumult, like that still could have happened with a little bit better injury luck in the playoffs. But tell me why you are so optimistic about Milwaukee. I think I pretty thoroughly outlaid the reasons why. I'm a little dubious that that championship ceiling is still there. Tell me why I'm dead wrong about that.
Okay, so let me first preface this by saying here, I tend to try to be as logical as possible when I try to keep my emotions in check. So that's the first thing I'll say. And then I'll also add this. If you would have told me last May that the coach of the Milwaukee Bucks was going to be Doc Rivers, I would have said, why? We have Doc Rivers at home. We just got rid of Mike Budenholzer. That's Doc Rivers in itself. Why are we doing this? Right. And the Bucks went with Adrian Griffin initially as the head coach to start off last season. Did not go according to plan, although the record was supreme, I believe 30-13 at the time of him being let go. But the thing was that the team just didn't have that much confidence of what the schemes were going to be. There was confusion about what their roles were going to be. And honestly, a lot of the wins that team put together under Adrian Griffin was more so just due to talent and not necessarily scheme. And the Bucks were looking like we need a little bit better going into the playoffs. And we need players to be aware of what their roles are, be aware of what's expected of them. And that's something that Doc Rivers can do really well. And I think that Doc Rivers is actually a really good choice to be the coach for this iteration of the Milwaukee Bucks, given the fact that he's really good at dealing with superstars. He can communicate really well, and he has the respect of the locker room, just given his resume. So last season, him coming in the middle of the season was difficult. not much time to practice. He wasn't familiar with the young guys, so he leaned on the older players a bit more. But you did see as the year went on, you saw more AJ Green. You saw Andre Jackson getting into the game as well later on. So I think with the full offseason here, with Doc able to have his coaching staff put into place, him having a chance to have a training camp, and him being able to put this team together the way that he envisioned it, which is, yes, it's a lot of older vets on this roster, but the other half is young guys. And he loves the push and pull of vets and young guys on the roster, because he says the vets will pull the young guys along while the young guys will push the vets because they want to get on the court. And that's a really healthy chemistry to have for a team. I think the Bucks roster reflects that. In addition to that, year 2 with Dame and Giannis getting to know each other, I think everybody was thinking initially that pick and roll was going to be crazy between the two of them, but it's not NBA 2K where you can just drop them in and everything is fine. They had to develop chemistry, and they're getting onto that. But I think the biggest piece of my optimism is around Damian Lillard. Because to his own admission, wasn't a great year for him. One of his worst years in a year where he came in knowing like, I'm just not right. So this team is really top heavy. So it goes as Giannis and as Dame goes. And Dame being on that team also puts Chris Middleton in a really ideal role where he doesn't have to be the primary shot creator. He can play that second guy behind Dame in that role, and while you have Giannis and his gravity opening up so much for everyone else on the team. So overall, I love the fact that Doc has pretty much like an audit year on the team as we head into what is going to be like his first true season coaching the team. I love that we have more time for the chemistry to develop between the main guys on the roster. I love the role that Chris Middleton is projected to be in when everyone is healthy. I love the young guys that are on this roster as well. The veteran free agency additions, I think, really serve the team well. I think every guy they added in free agency actually technically should do a better job than the guy that they're replacing on the roster, and it opens up a lot of different possibilities for the Bucks. Like Taurean Prince as a small ball 4 could really unlock some Giannis at the 5 lineups for when the Bucks do need more versatility defensively and need to move a bit quicker than they can with Brook Lopez on the floor. So I have a lot of reasons for optimism. I try to go through them as quick as possible to give you the overlay to react to, though.
Yeah, I think those are all fair. And I think sometimes I am still thinking like how, and I'm 29, not particularly old, but like how I grew up in the NBA was like small guards. Once they pass 32, it's sort of over. Forwards with a bunch of different surgeries, and offseason with 2 different ankle surgeries, it's not going to look great. Centers into their late 30s, like, all right, time to head to Cabo. Like it's over. And yet it does feel like it with modern medicine or whatever it is, like these guys are able to extend their primes longer than ever. And I think in particular with the case of Dame, like you look at guys like Steph Curry and Chris Paul, who at like age 34 have had all NBA type seasons. And if Dame is maybe a notch below those guys, he's within that stratosphere of talent, right? A top 75 player of all time. Chris Middleton's such a skill-based game. Like if he can just stay healthy, and it's so hard not having a medical background, knowing like, all right, are these injuries that are destined to reoccur over and over again? Or is this just like a series of bad luck? Like as a Knicks fan, we're experiencing that with OG Anunoby all the time. We're like, it seems random, but it just keeps happening. So you never really know. And then Brook Lopez, like a game that is not totally based on athleticism, that is based on his size and skill. Like you would think maybe there'd be a slight drop off, but he can age just well enough, and maybe the depth can supplement that. But to me, it ultimately comes down to Giannis, and that's kind of where I wanted to zoom in before wrapping up maybe on some of those tertiary guys the Bucks added. But I think Milwaukee's case as a title contender rests with, like, come April, May, June, Giannis's ability to still be the best player on planet Earth. And I think if he's more like the 5th best player on planet Earth, I don't know if that's enough for Milwaukee to win a championship with the team like that Boston looming that is just kind of comically overpowered, comically over depth. Like I think Giannis has to go into that series and be by far the best guy. And we saw the last time those two teams met and Milwaukee was a little shorthanded, Jason Tatum did just enough to tilt that balance in Boston's favor, even though Giannis was still the best player. Do you think he still has that in him as you look at some of his rate stats, some of the steal and block stuff? And it seems to indicate that the athleticism is maybe dropping off just a tick, or is that kind of a mirage? Or do you think Giannis is just going to be pissed and like there is a MVP, screw all of you, I'm still the man type season looming for him?
I think that the latter is what's coming for not even just Giannis, but a lot of guys on this Bucks team who feel slighted or feel as if they're not getting enough respect. And I definitely get that for sure. But it's also like, I mean, it's been 2 straight first round exits. So there is something that's a consequence that comes from being put out of the playoffs in the first round 2 years in a row. You're going to lose some national respect. And with that, a lot of guys, we know athletes love to have chips on their shoulder. Like it helps fuel them even more. And a lot of guys on this Bucks team have one. Giannis has one. And I was very pleased to see his performance in the Olympics, where he came out looking very dominant, led the Olympics in points per game, if I remember correctly, as well during his stint there. Even though Greece didn't do as well, it was a situation where it was Giannis, and he powered them forward to a lot of those wins. So seeing that bode well, seeing how Dame's attacking the offseason, because I do agree with you on the Bucks needing Giannis to be one of those best players in the world, but Dame has to as well. Like, this team is constructed for Dame and Giannis to be the stars. It's a top-heavy roster. So if something is not right with either one of those two guys, I don't like the Bucks' chances too much going forward. So my projection and optimism of the season is assuming health, and then getting through, which I think that's probably the biggest obstacle for this Bucks team at this point, is health, because even Chris Middleton, he's my favorite Buck. Like, I love Chris Middleton. I love the offensive game. The lateral quickness for Chris has declined quite a bit. So he is not that same 6'8" wing defender that he used to be when he was younger, but he's still somebody who's going to be really smart in team IQ situations. So it's about finding the right pieces around the big three the Bucks have to make sure you're able to try to cover up the weaknesses that they may have, and continue to just, play on what their strengths are. So I definitely think it's in there for Giannis and for Dame. They have to be the top 75 all-time NBA players that they were selected as for the Bucks to really have a shot. And I have faith that an offseason and Dame being aware of where he's at, knowing the coaching, knowing the team, knowing where he's playing, being more settled in, I think that's all going to be a big benefit for the Bucks. And Giannis, as you mentioned, he's the star. He was the consistent piece of the team all last season. Everybody else is having ups and downs, but he was consistent. And his injury, April 9th, I still remember the date, against the Celtics with that calf going down, it tanked a lot of things. And yet still, there was still hope for the Bucks with Dame that they could still pull off a first round win, but it didn't work out that way. So going into this season, led by Giannis and Dame, if those two are right, I feel like the Bucks are going to be right.
All right, last thing, Gary Trent Jr. How does he change things for them? Because I was pissed that he just walked right for nothing. Like, this is a guy who is still like, I remember Alex and I were talking about him. They're like, what is he now? 28. We looked up. He's like 25. Like,
yes.
He's been in the league for like, did he get into the NBA at 14? Like, what's going on here? He's like 18 points a game, 17 points a game, high volume 3-point shooter, very solid defender. Just feels like more than anyone else that they got, almost as much as like some of their stars being healthy. Like, he is going to take just enough of a load off those other guys. Someone else is a defense you have to stay attached to. You can't help off of to like try and double or triple Giannis. Like, that felt like a game changer to me that Milwaukee somehow got for basically nothing. What kind of impact do you think he has?
I think it's a big impact. Like, losing your starting shooting guard is always going to be tough. So when you can replace him with Gary Trent Jr., like that's a win. He is somebody who his role is going to be different here in Milwaukee as well. And Toronto was a lot of offensive creation relied on for him for that particular team. And that's not going to be the case in Milwaukee as much, at least when he's running with the starters. I am interested to see if he's running bench units, what his offensive freedom will look like. But when he's on the floor with Dame and with Giannis, what he's going to experience is a lot of catch and shoot three opportunities, normally pretty open because of the gravity that they create. So I love that the shooting aspect from that 2 spot should be similar. I'm not sure if he can hit the heights that Malik Beasley hit from that 3-point percentage, but he's also a really good knockdown shooter. In addition to that, I think he has a higher defensive potential than what we saw with Beasley here. And I don't know why it was thought to put Malik Beasley on the team's best offensive weapons throughout the season. But Gary Trent Jr. is somebody who should stand up a bit better than what Beasley did. And I think that's going to be a big boom for this team in particular, because at certain points late in the season, it was just hard to keep Beasley out there because the defense it was lacking so much, especially next to somebody like Dame, who we know, smaller guard, not known for his defense either. Like, you have to have somebody a bit more stout, a bit more sturdy, which again, that's why DeLon Wright signing makes a lot of sense. But for Gary Trent Jr., I love the fit, and his signing increased my ranking of the Bucks offseason all on its own, because who would have thought he would sign for a vet man?
Yeah, I'm a noted Bucks fans come at me. Bucks pessimist this year. I think Gary Trent Jr. is maybe my biggest hesitation in that. I think the balance they're gonna have on offense now, and to your point, the fact that you just like last year, the Bucks backcourt, you could just shred them. And
Easily.
I think that's where, like, as a Knicks fan, even with how Milwaukee had just again kicked our butts for like the last 5 years now, I was looking at that and saying it is not the worst matchup because there is just no one who has a chance guarding Jalen Brunson, right? And Brunson against the best defenders in the world is going to get his. But if you make it easy on him, like that just creates a cascade effect where it becomes really, really tough to beat the Knicks. And now Gary Trent is at least a good defender to throw on him. DeLon Wright off the bench is at least a good defender to throw on him. And I think those are often the margins that conference finals, conference semifinals are decided on. And offensively, again, just another person you can't ignore. Can't help off it when there are injuries. I think he's going to help the Bucks get an extra 2, 3, 4 wins in the regular season just by having someone there. You say, hey, we can give him the ball and he can go get us 24 on a night where Chris Middleton is out. I think that all makes a big difference. It makes me much more excited about Milwaukee. But Camille, I want to hear your takes on the Knicks. We're going to get into that next on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Bucks.
So you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, let me tell you something, because we got something a little different here for you. From now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Did you hear me? Did you hear what I just said? $5 can get you a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, if you have a YouTube TV base plan, you'll also be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. Listen, if you're a Giants fan or a Packers fan right now, you might want to check out some other teams for a couple weeks, just see how it goes, so on and so forth. And this is a perfect opportunity for you to do so. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. And I personally love the flexibility of being able to cancel anytime I want to, because situations can change. Sometimes you might not be as financially flexible, So make sure you just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Again, visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, we are back. Locked On Knicks, Locked On Bucks, keeping it going. Let's flip it around. What do you want to know about the Knicks?
So big offseason for the Knicks, especially with the Bridges trade, bringing him there. The Nova Knicks has been the talk of the town, the talk of the nation with the Knicks, especially after the playoff run that you guys had last year. It was really encouraging. It was one of those playoff runs where it's like a lot of heart. And you're just watching these guys battle out despite the injuries, despite everything else going on, despite playing 45 minutes a game. Like, it was just one of those situations where even if you're not a Knicks fan, you were invested in what they were doing because it just seemed like it was such hard work. It was grimy basketball for the most part, and I really loved watching it. But my first one is, with Bridges coming over, what is the rotation for the Knicks? Like, what is the starting five? Like, who are the main guys on this roster now? Who gets moved to the bench now with, OG re-signing, with Bridges coming there? What does the rotations look like for the Knicks?
So I would be stunned if the opening day starting lineup, assuming everyone's healthy, wasn't Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson. And that is a win for the Knicks, but also a loss in some ways. I think they're really going to miss Donte DiVincenzo's spacing. All Bucks fans got to experience the beauty of having a player that needs to be guarded the second he crosses half court. Donte DiVincenzo isn't quite that, but maybe 10 feet once you've crossed half court, you have to be on him. He was the guy who made the third most threes in the NBA last year. They already lose some spacing. You hinted at this earlier, exchanging Isaiah Hartenstein for Mitchell Robinson in the starting lineup. I think their offense is going to be further cramped by not having DiVincenzo on the floor. And I'm fascinated to see how the Knicks handle that all year, when I think there's a world where their best lineups are with DiVincenzo out there, and then two of Bridges, Anunoby, Randle. The issue is those are pretty clearly your next three best players after Jalen Brunson. So there is kind of an impetus to start all of them, but I wonder if the Knicks shuffle that lineup throughout the year. Maybe have days where they play Mikal Bridges off the bench. Maybe have days where they close with Julius Randle off the bench. And what are kind of the cascade effects of that? They just need to get shooting on the floor, need to get spacing on the floor. And to be clear, I don't think it's bad with their starting lineup. You look at what they had the last few seasons with all three of Jalen Brunson RJ Barrett and Julius Randle, all lefties, all like to operate in that mid-post area. It was crowded. It was horrible. It was like a Walmart on like a Black Friday. It was not a good situation. So better than that, but to win the East, to beat the Celtics, you have to maximize spacing. And the Knicks, I think, have some questions about that now after getting Mikal Bridges.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Dante DiVincenzo. As you mentioned, Bucks fans are very familiar with Dante's game. And
Bucks legend. I apologize for not introducing him that
yes,
way.
and I mean, and part of it is I don't know if Dante is the Dante that he is now if he didn't leave Milwaukee, because he mentioned himself that part of what helped his 3-point game grow was the years he spent in Golden State and learning from Steph Curry. So I always say to Bucks fans, I know we see Dante cooking in New York, but who knows if he would have ever reached those heights here in Milwaukee had he not had those other experiences in the league to help his game grow. But yeah, I got a lot of love for Dante. I love watching Dante cook it up for you guys. And you mentioned Julius Randle, who was injured through a really big Knicks playoff run. What do you see his role being for the team this year after the team had so much success without him on the court? Because there have been rumblings like maybe should the Knicks trade Julius Randle and try to get pieces that fit, around with the Jalen Brunson-led Knicks a bit more, maybe a little bit more defense, maybe something more versatile than what Randle can bring to the table. But what do you think about Randle's fit and role on this particular Knicks team in this era?
Yeah, so I think it's such a tricky thing to pin down because he is not the best fit. In fact, I think the Knicks, unless they really lean into small ball and just put their 5 best guys on the floor, which means taking that starting lineup, swapping out Mitchell Robinson, putting in Dante DiVincenzo, which I have my doubts if Tom Thibodeau is going to do that as anything more than kind of a last resort in certain games and certain moments. I think your best lineup is going to be one without Randle on the floor. It's going to be Brunson, DiVincenzo, Bridges, Anunoby, insert center here, probably Mitchell Robinson. And that is a tricky dynamic because at the same time, I think you absolutely need Julius Randle's shot creation when games slow down, when you get into the playoffs, when you're going up against the Bucks and they can put all that size, all that smothering defense on the floor. You need to just be able to throw it to someone other than Jalen Brunson and say, hey, go get a bucket. Mikal Bridges gives you a little bit of that, but he has never really shown the ability to be the second option on a genuine title contender. Neither has Julius Randle, but when you look at the 2 All-NBAs in 3 seasons, 3 All-Star teams in 4 seasons, you see that ceiling there, even though he has no playoff resume to speak of because he's had 1 terrible postseason on the Knicks, 1 where he was really injured, and 1 where he didn't even play. So for a team that I think is as deep as any in basketball, that probably has as many above average to great players as any team in the league, there are a stunning amount of questions about what it's actually going to look like for the Knicks when things are clicking, and maybe what this roster looks like midseason. Because I'm not ruling out the possibility that Julius Randle is traded. I'm not ruling out the possibility that Mitchell Robinson is traded along with the Knicks' remaining assets, trying to get an upgrade at the center position. It's just like, what is that deal going to be? And who is that kind of like golden goose out there that would make everything work for the Knicks? Because I think last offseason they had a shot at going to get that guy, and it was Kristaps Porzingis. The Knicks, given them bad history there, didn't bite on that. I think that might have decided the next 3 NBA championships, because I think if the Knicks had gotten him, I kind of think they'd be where the Celtics are right now. Secondly, if they could have retained Isaiah Hartenstein, because he was such a perfect fit, and unfortunately they couldn't do that.
Yeah, Hartenstein, like we mentioned earlier, I think that's a really big loss that a lot of people aren't necessarily focusing on. When he went to the Thunder, I'm like, that's a great pickup for them, and it's going to really hurt the Knicks. So I guess my last question to you, Gavin, would be just where do you see the Knicks in the hierarchy of the East, and how far do you think is like the potential for this team to go? Like, do you think that the Knicks, as they're currently constructed, could be a team that's representing the East in the finals, or do you think it's like we might need to move a few pieces out, like you mentioned, maybe getting some more versatility at that center position that fits really well of what you guys have going on, which is a really tricky proposition? Because I know for the Bucks, people were saying like, let's trade Brook Lopez. And it's like, I get the understanding of it, but who else are you going to bring in that can space the floor and protect the rim the way that he does? If there's another option, let's go for it, but I don't quite see it. But for the Knicks, what do you see as like their ceiling, their potential for this particular season? Do you think that they could be in the finals this year?
Yeah, so first of all, I am proudly reverse jinxing them as much as I possibly can. I think it is an embarrassment and a basketball travesty if the Boston Celtics are healthy and they don't get to the finals and win the finals again this year. I think they are that much better than everyone else. They are that well constructed. They are swallowing vomit here. They're the perfectly built basketball team for the modern era of the
agree,
game,
yeah.
and then they should beat everyone. If that doesn't happen, or if they have some untimely injuries, and we'll see when and how Kristaps Porzingis comes back, I think I'm comfortable saying that I have the Knicks as the second favorite in the East. I'm impressed by the group that Philadelphia has put together. The best version of Paul George, at least while he's still somewhat close to his prime, is always going to be better than the best version of Mikal Bridges. So you could argue they made a bigger upgrade than the Knicks. Joel Embiid was impressive, but still not fully healthy for that series against the Knicks, so that could change things. The Knicks still beat them without Julius Randle. So right now, I can't, in good faith, if I want to continue hosting this podcast and have people listen to me, I cannot say that Philly is better than the Knicks, even though I love their offseason. I think their depth is better, and their starting lineup is going to be incredible. And Milwaukee, I feel a little dirtier about putting the Knicks ahead of them because you guys have won a championship within the last 4 years. The Knicks, for everything they've accomplished, for as magical as this Jalen Brunson era has been, have not been to a conference finals yet. So it feels a little sacrilegious to put the Knicks ahead of the Bucks. And yet I'm doing it because this entire Knicks team is smack dab in the middle of their prime. Julius Randle, I think turning 30 this year, is their oldest player that's going to be in the rotation. Everyone else is late 20s to mid 20s. Milwaukee, a little bit older, even if the high-end talent on paper in Giannis is still better than anything the Knicks can put out there. So I would have the Knicks slightly ahead of the Bucks. I assume you would disagree with that. I assume everyone on Locked On Bucks listening would disagree with that, and that is okay. We're here to make amends over our disagreements. But that is where I'd have the Knicks right now. But I do have very real questions about how it looks early in the season. I do think there's a world where they find the best lineups, they find the right rotations, and the Knicks are near a 60-win team and are just a dominant regular season group. I think their bench is going to be incredible this year. I think they're going to flip games. I think the starting lineup could look a little clunky to start things off. And if it looks really bad, or if Julius Randle is having like his every other year malaise, which he went 2 years without having, so fingers crossed that that's over, things could get bad. Things could get dicey fast. I said it before. There are a surprising amount of questions for a team that is this deep and this good. But overall, I'm very confident in the Knicks being certainly a top 4 team in the East. I think very well could be the second best team in the East.
Now, I definitely agree with you on Knicks being the top 4 team. Second best, I have a sinking suspicion that like when the Eastern Conference standings all shake out, we're going to see Boston and then Philly in that 2 spot. Philly, to me, seems like a team that's going to be a really good regular season team.
Yeah. Can Joel Embiid play more than 60 games? So that's my question.
Yeah, that's the question there for Milwaukee. And I have questions about how Milwaukee might approach the regular season if we see less minutes for those top guys to try to preserve health for the regular season, if we see more random rotations or other players who you might not see in the playoffs, but soaking up those regular season minutes. And I do wonder what that will do for the Bucks during the season. But I could see the Bucks finishing anywhere between like, they could finish as high as second, I think, in the East, and they could finish as low as like 5th or 6th if things don't shake out the way that they go. I think they'll be a top, I think like the 3 seed, maybe 4 seed for the Bucks this year. But the seeding isn't as important to me as the matchups are in the playoffs. And I do think that matchup depending is going to be really important for the Bucks, but I like their opportunity. If they can remain healthy, I really like what the Bucks can bring to the table because as we mentioned earlier, when they were healthy and all on the floor, the numbers show like they were a dominant group. They just have to be able to be on the floor at the same time because Doc Rivers only got to see his big 3 on the floor while he's coaching like 5 times throughout the whole last half of the season. So they got to be healthy, and that's a big if for the Bucks. So a lot of people who have pessimism around the Bucks, it's normally around the health and the age, and I respect that completely. And for me, my optimism comes like if they just get the year where it all breaks right and they do remain healthy long enough, big things can come for Milwaukee this year.
Yeah, I think Milwaukee was right at the end of last year to not prioritize seed, missed that matchup with the Sixers. It wasn't fun. It was brutal. I think they would have beaten Indiana if Giannis could have came back in that series. And I think they should do exactly the same thing this year. Like especially with how the East is lined up, it is about staying away from Boston as long as possible and being healthy, getting into the playoffs. Like those are the only 2 things I'd care about. I'm worried that Tom Thibodeau will only care about grinding out every single win, but we will see how it plays out. You can, of course, follow Camille over at Locked On Bucks, wherever you can find podcasts. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube. I think they are one of the main teams Knicks fans should be tracking throughout this year. I'd be thrilled if we could do this again in the playoffs. Hopefully Boston's out already. Hopefully it's in the conference finals. That would be a whole lot of fun. But until then, thank you so much for coming on Locked On Knicks. I certainly enjoyed being a part of Locked On Bucks, and we will talk to you both soon on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Bucks.